Shalom from this frozen Midwest of the United States. This is Chris with firstcenturychristianity.net. And you may be wondering, what the heck is Chris talking about with using DOGE and the fall of Babylon in the book of Revelation as a headline? Well, it's going to make sense here in a second. And it's probably going to make more sense than you even can imagine. But the crux of this matter is when to take the Bible literally and when to not take the Bible literally. And the same thing applies to our lives and when we converse with each other, when we talk about, events with our families, our default position is that they're literally speaking truth to us, unless we hear a tone of their voice or hear some sarcasm or we hear some colloquialisms, and then we know not to take something literally or seriously. And the Bible is the same exact way, but it's foundational that when you teach a child that an apple's an apple and an orange is an orange, they have to literally be true. And then you can build upon these things as you move on through life. So the Bible is almost all of it is literally true. And you can have spiritual applications and you can have greater applications and metaphors, and all of these different literary devices exist within the Bible. As I've been putting out messages now for a couple of weeks on this, trying to get folks to read the Bible and to consume it the way it was intended to be consumed. But we have to take this foundational approach that if something in the Bible can be literal, if it's possible for it to be literal, then we have to first understand that to be literal, and it can never not mean that it's literal. The adultery command is the one that comes up most often. The adultery is against the Torah. It's against God's law from Genesis to Revelation all the way throughout. But it's also used as an analogy for going after false gods. It's also used as an analogy. Wedding supper of the Lamb is an analogy of Yeshua returning and there being a wedding supper. We are not literally going to marry our brother in heaven, Yeshua, the Son of God, and Yahweh did not literally marry Israel either. These are things that aren't literal, even though they're repeated throughout the Bible several times. They are never meant to be taken literally. They're used as analogies to say that when you cheat on God, it feels to him like you would if you were cheating on your spouse. It breaks his heart, and he doesn't want you to do that. And so he uses this language to try to reach us where we are. But to return back to things being literal, here we talk about the fall of Babylon, and we have these merchants who became rich from her and to stand at a distance because of the torment and weeping and mourning. Well, this came up about 5 years ago when a ship got sideways in the Suez Canal, and the global commerce came to a halt for a couple of weeks. And in our congregation, we went, oh, look at that. Global commerce came to a halt and prices skyrocketed. People couldn't get staples, couldn't get food, just because of a 2 or 3 week interruption in a supply chain on one side of the earth. And so when we talk about this fall of Babylon, there's a system in the end days that is an economic system that's going to fall, and it's going to cause a global famine, global financial calamity. And we have to take this literally, especially when we see things happen in history that are literally this. At the end of the U.S. Revolutionary War, somebody wrote that it took a wagon load of money to buy a loaf of bread. We could see when the Roman Empire fell that the world suffered incredible economic hardship, and it had to learn how to take care of itself. And it broke up into little kingdoms, and people had to, have a huge reset. And there's one final reset coming with the fall of Babylon. And what we found out in recent days with DOGE is that the United States is funding, apparently, every country and every organization and news outfit on the planet. We're just taking United States taxpayer money or borrowed money from countries that we're then doling out to countries, oftentimes even to the countries that we borrow the money from. We are economic suckers. And this is the reason this started, for those who want the history lesson, because it appears that the entire world has forgotten what socialism and communism is, even though we just defeated it a few decades ago, is that the Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, was we were in a Cold War with them, and they had an ideology that is against the Bible. It's against everything. It was evil. It was an economic ideology that from each according to his ability and to each according to his need, and that everybody was basically going to live in poverty and everybody was going to work for the glorification of the state, and the state had replaced God. And the USSR was really bad, and everybody was in it for themselves. And this is why JFK famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." He was talking about opposing the Soviet Union when he uttered those words, that we should be, as Westerners and as Christians, we should live our lives in such a way that we can take care of ourselves, serve God, and serve our neighbor. That is at the core of Western values. We should not be looking for the government to hand us things and to take care of us, or anybody for that matter. We should want to be independent and free people. And to oppose the USSR, we had to do economic things. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were famously able to overcome the USSR through economic means. And the USSR came to a halt around about 1991 is when the Berlin Wall came down. Now, they had established their empire by taking their wealth and spreading it around to their satellite states. And when all the satellite states lost Mother Russia, they had to economic calamity, and they had to figure it out on their own. The United States apparently never stopped countering that. And during the Cold War, we set up agencies that were going to prop up our allies all over the world with our money. And as DOGE has figured out, nobody turned the spigot off. And here we are 40 years later, and we are sending money to countries and organizations all over the world. And just like when the Suez Canal got clogged and the economics stopped, what happens when the United States turns off the spigot? What happens when we stop buying news subscriptions from every news outlet on Earth? They're going to suffer hardship. What happens when we stop sending money for AIDS in Africa, which is astonishing that they haven't figured out in 50 years how to combat that, because just not having sex is free. You don't really need a lot of money to not get AIDS. You just don't have sex until you get married, and then marry somebody who doesn't have AIDS. And that pretty much solves that. But the problem here is that the United States appears to be this Babylonian power. And literally, reading the Bible, these things are literally going to happen because they literally happened before. We don't need to spiritualize this. We do need to be open to how it's ultimately going to play out. Is the United States the ultimate Babylon? Well, today it looks like that. Today, that's what it looks like. But if the United States went away today and the Messiah didn't come back, the world would figure it out. New alliances would be made, and there would be different economics, and things would be different. And you might have to do something different for a living, and the value of your house may plummet, or the value of your house may skyrocket. But as it looks right now, when we talk about the merchants of the earth, I think it's verse 11, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, every type of citron wood, every article of ivory, every article made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble, cinnamon and spice and incense, perfume, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, cargoes of horses, chariots and slaves and human lives. The fruit you long for has gone from you. And all these things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you, and your men will no longer find them. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning. And brothers and sisters, when the United States economy does crumble, which it's going to do, whether it's through supernatural means or because of our own foolishness, all of this wealth, the ability we have to have any type of food that we want at any given time, the ability we have to have every type of modern convenience. In fact, we invent the modern conveniences and all of the entertainment and all the sports, the things that this nation glorifies. going to come to an end. And that will be a literal fulfillment of this Babylonian prophecy. Now, who knows if it's going to be the literal fulfillment? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But the bottom line today, and the lesson I really want you to take away, is that when the Bible can be literal, you must take it as literal. You don't have a choice. When the Bible says adultery is a sin, adultery is a sin, even if adultery can be applied in different places. The same with murder. As the Messiah said, if you think evil of your brother, you've already committed murder. He expands the commandment, but he doesn't replace the commandment. So we have to start from a literal foundation. And if things can be literal, then they are. And if they can be literal and also have different applications, that's true too. But if they are all never literal, that happens a lot. And that's the subject that a lot of people go off the rails on, because they take things that are never meant to be literal as literal, like the wedding supper of the Lamb, which may sound blasphemous to you, but that's really just an analogy. Yeshua is our adopted brother. He is the Son of God, and we are all heirs according to the promise. That's why we call each other brother and sister. The Yeshua is not coming back to literally marry a congregation. That's something that's meant to be taken as an analogy to show the joy of this union of him and his pure, chaste congregation. The same thing with Yahweh and divorcing Israel and Judah. That's not literal. It's never been meant to be literal. What he means through that is to say that when Israel and Judah went after other gods, it was as if a spouse was cheating on their spouse. But Yahweh also calls Israel his firstborn son. Israel is not his firstborn son. But he says he loves Israel like his firstborn son. So you see, there's some things that are taken literal that aren't supposed to be taken literally. They're supposed to be used exclusively as analogies and metaphors and sod and darash, if we want to use the Hebrew words. But when something can be literal, that has to be your default position. And it'll be interesting to see when Babylon falls, how that turns out. I hope you all have a blessed week, and let's pray for warmer weather. Let's look forward to springtime and harvest and the spring holy days that are coming up. It's going to be a blessed time. May Yahweh bless you and keep you in the name of his son, Yeshua.